Good evening, everyone. My name is Damian Padnott. I'm the superintendent.
Это наше
Hold for a couple minutes just to allow additional individuals who will be joining us tonight to get on, as well as allow for folks who may need some interpreter
мы подождем.
to get that as well.
Еще одну минуту, и мы начнем.
Good evening again, everyone. My name is Damian Padnott, and I have the privilege of serving as the superintendent of the Renton School District. You'll see some people with their faces in these little boxes on the side, and these are members of our cabinet who are joining this evening here at the district office. And there is a Q&A feature we just want to draw your attention to before we get rolling, which will allow you to type any questions you have into the Q&A box. You click send. Cabinet will be answering those questions as things are going on. Some of those questions may be answered through the presentation. Other questions we might not have answers to at this point in time and we'll be working on. However, we will be reviewing all questions and see which ones may need to be added to an FAQ list that we are starting. Additionally, given that we have interpreters this evening, we will be attempting to talk a little bit more slowly as we go along, just so that we make sure that they have the opportunity to do that interpretation. So again, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to be here this evening. Very important topic we're going to talk about tonight, and really two of the goals getting started with are just to share our preliminary plan as we prepare for the start of school on September 2nd, which is 7 weeks away from today. Additionally, tonight is an opportunity to hear questions and get feedback regarding our preliminary plan. I want to begin, though, first by saying thank you to our staff, students, families, and community. Since school buildings closed on March 17th, I could not be prouder of how people stepped up. From our nutrition services staff to our technology services staff, you see some of those pictures on the screen right now, to our teachers, to our support staff, and to our administrators, thank you. Thank you also to our students and families as you had to adjust to new realities and challenges during the pandemic. Tonight, I know we also have some community members joining us. I want to thank the Renton Regional Community Foundation, Communities and Schools of Renton, InvestEd, and other nonprofits and community-based organizations that have done tremendous work in supporting our families, as well as the broader community. I'm also proud of the Renton Innovation Zone Partnership, which is a new nonprofit that works in two of the most underserved communities in our district, Skyway and the Highlands communities. Led by a former Renton High School graduate, this organization, in coordination with community-based organizations that work in those communities and city officials, has helped families get access to food, testing, and other resources. While there is no doubt that we learned a lot this spring that will help us moving forward, our community should also take pride in the work done to date. It is one of the reasons that I feel blessed to serve as the superintendent of the Renton School District. Now, as we look forward to starting a new school year, as I mentioned already, 7 weeks from today, I know that there are a myriad of emotions in our community. Whether it was in our family survey, focus groups, the nearly 4,600 comments about our potential models for reopening that were captured in the survey, and I read each and every one of those, emails, social media posts, or text messages, I've heard the concerns, anxiety, and questions. The concerns of a grandparent who happened to be one of my teachers when I was a student, who shared that he felt it is not safe for his grandkids to return to school. The parent of a fifth grader, worried that any form of remote or in-home learning will cause her child's needs to not be adequately met. The staff member that fears that returning to school could put his life in jeopardy. And the staff member who worries that if we do not return to school, that she will be laid off or furloughed. This is definitely an interesting
Вернулся в школу, и потому он потеряет.
Renton School District. And what I have always tried to hold tight to is advice I received from my dad years ago. He would tell us that it is not important what you are, but rather who you are. He would stress to us that our character is what is important, not whether you are a superintendent or have some fancy title. I share this because I wish in some ways that I or the district, that we could just make these decisions very cold and detached.
Comparto esto porque son piezas que están alrededor. Otra vez puedo poner
Staff who I've worked with, former students who now work in the district or have kids in the district, students, staff, and families I've gotten to know during my time as superintendent, my relatives who attend our schools, my sister who works for the district, my dad who subs in the district, and my kids who are in middle school and elementary school. Any superintendent who has not lost sleep over the last 4 months is a person who is too cold and detached to truly serve. While tonight we are going to share about our plan, I want to stress that it is our preliminary plan. Wherever we end up in the next 7 weeks, and I believe if there is a lesson that we should take from this pandemic, is that we should expect change. I know that there will be segments of our community that will be unhappy. However, I hope what will show through is the character and integrity of the decisions that are made, even if you might happen to disagree with those decisions. Now, last night, my wife received a text from a friend who has kids in the district, and the person shared with my wife that she couldn't believe we were going to hold this town meeting due to the strong emotions in our community. But getting at the notions of character that I just mentioned, it goes back to the core values of our district. I truly believe that in alignment with our core value of service, that to serve, we have to listen and hear your questions and try to answer those questions. And that is part of what tonight is about. Additionally, what we learned this spring, no matter what the model for the reopening of school might ultimately be, I believe will move us closer to achieving our core value of excellence as we focus on continuously improving. Finally, I hope you will see how our core value of equity has influenced our preliminary planning. Now, I read comments in some of our surveys that I believe confuse notions of equality and equity. Equity requires prioritization, not treating everything or everyone exactly the same. Thus, you will see priorities and areas of focus tonight that are intentional. So, big picture, just for a second, the preliminary plan is based on current guidance from OSPI, the Washington State Department of Health, Labor and Industry. And those guidance and requirements have drove what we've put forth thus far. Obviously, with all that's going around or going on, both locally and nationally, the context and circumstances are fluid. Thus, we will have to continue to prepare, but at the same time, be flexible. And I think that that's one of the key lessons we've learned this spring. All of us have to be flexible throughout this process. I also want to assure our community and staff that we are doing parallel planning. Our current plan obviously calls for a hybrid model, but simultaneously, we're also planning for the reality that we could have to be fully remote from the beginning of the school year. Additionally, I am in weekly and bi-weekly meetings with the state superintendent, the Puget Sound Educational Service District, which is a regional county office essentially, the Washington State Department of Health, Public Health, Seattle and King County. Was on a meeting today with Public Health, Seattle and King County, and the Department of Health, and superintendents from all over. Outside of last week, except when my wife said that I had to take a vacation and not respond to email all last week. Other than that, every other week I'm in these meetings. And I want to stress that this is what we know as of today. Context and the circumstances can definitely change. And I want to be clear on this as well. No matter when school buildings open, the goal is to do so safely and based on the guidance from the Washington State Department of Health, Public Health, Seattle and King County, as well as our state superintendent's office in Olympia. So I want to take everyone back a little bit to provide some context. Before the state provided its guidance, back in May, what we heard from the state superintendent is that we should expect to open in some type of hybrid model. And that it was highly unlikely that we would be fully in person. Additionally, it would be highly unlikely that we would be fully remote. And so in May, I shared with our cabinet that regardless of whatever the model might be, that our guiding principle needed to be the health and safety of our staff. I also shared a mantra that we need to do the necessary preparation work to ensure that we're ready for the first day, first week, first month, and beyond of the school year. Additionally, I laid out some priorities that I wanted to be clear about. Going back to that guiding principle, that the health and safety of our students and staff would be one of our priorities. Our youngest learners, also given the difficulty of doing remote learning with our youngest learners, that would also be a priority. Students making transitions to the 6th and 9th grade, I wanted that to be a priority. Our students who are receiving special education or English language learner services. And also the notion that we would likely have to create a fully remote or virtual option for families who are not ready yet to send their kids back to school. Again, this was before the state sent out any of its guidance. We did not know what that guidance would say, but we wanted to do some preparatory work. Then on June 11th, the state superintendent's office, in coordination with the Department of Health and Labor and Industry, released its guidance and requirements. We received that guidance, I remember it was like 11:07 a.m. on June the 11th, and the state superintendent held a press conference at 11:30. I was a little disconcerted about the state superintendent's press conference because it seemed to imply that schools should be ready to fully open with all kids come the first day of school, which I felt was unrealistic given the requirements put forth in the guidance. And you see some of those requirements below. Health screening for students and staff that can potentially be handled through an attestation by families. cloth face coverings required for students and staff. 6 feet of physical distancing required in schools. Buses were treated differently. They said we could, in theory, fill buses to capacity, but roll down the windows. Frequent hand washing. And I also want to point out, because of our location in King County, there is an important role for public health, Seattle and King County. That while the state has set kind of the minimum guidance requirements, our public health agency has the potential to be more restrictive based on the conditions within our community. Now, even before June 11th, but starting in May and continuing into June, we were preparing for the OSPI guidance and responded to it once it was released. We had our Learning and Teaching Steering Committee that put forth recommendations on June 18th. We had family and staff surveys. We conducted some focus groups with families and students. We started our operations prep. And additionally, we are part of a national strategy lab with 8 other districts that is receiving additional support as we plan for the opening of school. So again, I want to stress that this plan is preliminary. It's based on the current guidance and requirements from the Department of Health. And as we shared, even in our initial communication, the plan will be adjusted as needed in consultation with the Department of Health, Public Health, Seattle and King County, and OSPI. And now to talk a little bit more about our preliminary plan for 2020-21, I would like to introduce our Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Shannon Harvey.
Good evening. As Dr. Patnod said, really this preliminary plan is based on the information that we have from the Department of Health and OSPI on this date. We know that things are changing rapidly around the coronavirus, and so as Dr. Patnod said, we're continuing to monitor that, and our plan will be modified as the guidance to us changes. So as we develop the preliminary plan, really we were thinking about 4 main areas. 1, students really driving our decisions, including students with special services. We also have a belief that younger students have less ability to learn remotely and that they should be prioritized for in-person learning if possible. We also believe that all students have needs for connection and belonging. And most importantly, that we wanted to make sure our health precautions for students and staff followed all Department of Health guidelines. So our plan, as we have put out to the public already, currently includes our kindergarten through 3rd grade students attending Monday through Friday in person. Friday would be the normal delay start as we've done previously. For our 4th through 12th graders, we would split them into 2 groups by last name. So families who have kids at different levels, maybe an elementary and a middle school student, would be on the same schedule. Group A would do in-person learning on Monday and Wednesday, and then in-home learning on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then the opposite for Group B, with in-home learning on Monday and Wednesday, and in-home learning Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then in-person learning on Tuesday and Thursday. We have had some questions about why we've chosen not to do a Monday, Tuesday, clean on Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday for our second group of students. As we talked about it, we were really thinking about the instructional benefits for students being 5 days off of school and 2 days in person versus students having an opportunity to have in-person instruction from their teacher, being gone for them for 1 day, supporting some in-home learning, and then being back in person. And we felt instructionally that that would be better for our students. We also considered the cleaning and health guidelines and know that regardless of which group comes in, every evening we need to disinfect. So every evening, whether it's the same group of students coming in or a different group of students, we are committed to our disinfecting and know that we will need to hire additional custodial staff to make sure that the health procedures are followed. We also are creating a Renton online school for families who are choosing fully remote learning for their students. Preschool, we are still working on. Meadowcrest holds our preschool programs, and we have two really distinct programs. Our inclusive preschool program, which has our students who receive special education services, as well as community peers. We also have our Head Start and ECAP program. Both programs are different in the numbers of students in the program, as well as the number of hours, days of week that they attend. And Head Start and ECAP additionally have some extra guidelines that we need to make sure that we are adhering to. So we are still awaiting additional guidance on those programs, and we hope to have information out on that soon. As soon as we have some plans on that, we will be putting that out to the public. Students with special education needs or English language learner needs, at a minimum, their in-person time will be aligned with the grade level that they're in. So if they're kindergarten through third grader, they would be in person every day. If they're a fourth to 12th grader, at a minimum, it would be the hybrid model. But we're also looking to see if we can add additional in-person time as possible by space and as IEPs are show necessity, excuse me. So we've had some questions about why kindergarten through third graders would be going to school over the full week and every day. So over the past 2 years, we've really worked to reduce our kindergarten through third grade class sizes. We know that we had some schools last year with higher class sizes due to space. We've worked with those schools to ensure that we can reduce those class sizes. We've also assessed each of our elementary schools and can fit approximately 20 desks in most classrooms that maintains the 6-foot physical distancing requirements. So we did a protocol with principals where we went into schools, identified classrooms that could hold 20 students. We also identified some classrooms that could not hold 20 students. And so principals are making plans for how they may use those additional spaces within their building or move classrooms so that our kindergarten through third grade classrooms could be maintained in a classroom that can fit 20 desks. Principals will really be working with their staff, depending on the building, to determine where students will be learning based on the space needed. So our Renton online program, we are still working to develop. Right now, within our preliminary plan, our Renton online program, students would not be enrolled in their home school, but they would be allowed to return to their home school at the beginning of a new trimester if space was available. Students will be provided with computers or they could use their own. In August, we'll be sending out more information on our online program, as well as an application asking interested families to commit to the Renton online school model.
So before I talk a little bit about the learning and teaching recommendations, I did just want to mention we see that there are lots of questions in the Q&A, and we're trying to respond to what we can. We also know from some of the questions that are there that they will be answered a little bit further in this presentation, and then we'll also save the Q&A so that we can capture those questions and make sure we get those answered. I just wanted people to know that because that number is getting up there, and I realize we have a lot of things we have to figure out. One thing that we did this spring, as mentioned earlier, was we thought about creating learning and teaching recommendations. So we engaged a steering committee and 16 work groups to create learning and teaching recommendations focused on learning for this upcoming school year. We asked this large group of collaborators to think about what learning would look like for students in the ideal in 2 different settings. If we had to be fully remote, and if we had the opportunity to be partially in person, really thinking through how would students engage? What would be prioritized for in-person learning? We relied on the expertise of our teachers, 120 of them to be exact, and based on these proposals and recommendations, we based the proposals and recommendations on what we've learned throughout the spring, as well as what we've heard from students and families about what they need. One area of need is around really being clear about asynchronous, synchronous, so that would be live, and asynchronous or non-time dependent activities. So we've outlined in our implementation recommendations the opportunities that students and their families will need to have access to. Our goal is to ensure that we are providing relevant opportunities and increasing access to both live and non-time dependent learning experiences. This will continue to be clarified and updated as we receive more guidance. Another place where we heard feedback from people is around online platforms and digital tools to support learning. So we want to ensure consistency and ease of access for students and families while ensuring that we have the right tools for specific learning needs. In alignment with OSPI guidance, we've clarified our learning management system recommendations to 2, so Google Classroom for all grades and Canvas for grades 6 through 12 as well. We'll be putting out more information about the various digital learning tools which can support student learning, specifically at different grade levels and in different content areas.
And continuing on with the recommendations to provide district or central supports relate to resources to support teachers in designing and delivering effective remote instruction, and to provide teachers broadly needed resource for families, such as things like technology tutorials, so that lots of teachers are not all separately creating the very same tools. Scheduling guidance addresses 2 questions that we recognize this spring. One is students, mostly secondary, being scheduled for live meetings with 2 different teachers at the same time. And the second is 2 students in the same household who share a computer who both need it at the same time. So the work here will be to coordinate schedules that prevent both. Supports for families. This recommendation identifies a broad range of supports. It includes efforts ranging from providing technology and learning materials to families, to common expectations that schools develop and communicate clear methods and systems by which families may connect with teachers to request additional supports. Professional learning, this recommendation is already happening. It's specific to teachers and the need to survey them, which is happening, and then provide them with the additional professional learning opportunities they need related to remote instruction. And finally, the steering committee recognized the need to engage students and families in identifying any specific individual barriers that prevent either students or families from accessing the remote instruction, and then to work together to identify resources that ensure access.
And I failed at introducing those 2 ladies, so I apologize. So the first person who spoke was Ellen Dorr, who was our Chief Technology Officer. And secondly, Jessica Granger, who serves as the Chief of School Improvement and works directly with our Renton Innovation Zone schools. And they served as the leads on this learning and teaching committee. So thank you both for your leadership there. To talk a little bit about our operations prep and the work that's been taking place over the last couple of months, I would now like to introduce our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, Dr. Fred Miyako.
Good evening. I have the privilege of leading our business and support services teams, as mentioned by Dr. Patnod, in preparing for our response to the COVID pandemic. As mentioned earlier, our driving concern is to ensure that we prepare safely for the reopening of our schools for students, staff, and of course, ultimately the community as well. Safety is of paramount concern in our planning. Pictured here on this chart is a floor plan for one of our schools at Renton Park Elementary. At this school and at every other location in our district, we've sent teams of people to assess and understand the unique challenges at each location. Depicted here on the chart, you will see specific locations identified for student and staff entrances, queuing locations for universal temperature checks, locations for hand sanitizing stations and plexiglass installations, as well as a myriad of other planning pieces. As mentioned earlier, a detailed plan for each school is in development and will be finalized following our learning plan being determined and the guidance issued by OSPI and the King County Department of Health. Moving on to the next slide. This slide gives you a sense of some of the details we're working on. To date, we've identified more than $3 million in supplies, materials, and additional staffing requirements to meet the Department of Health standards and requirements. I've talked about a few of them, but I would like to highlight just a couple more. Health screenings. We know that we're going to have at the entrance to the buildings some mechanism to be able to manage health screenings for all staff and potentially for all students coming into our buildings. And so We've set up presently at transportation, the Facilities Operations and Maintenance Center, and CAC, the administrative location, some demonstration sites to show a kiosk-like operation that is self-serve for temperature checks. These, in addition to other handheld infrared devices, allow for a robust capability to take temperatures for all students and staff entering the buildings. There are lots of details to work out with that, but we do believe that we have the technology in place to be able to take care of that within 15 minutes of both staff and students entering our buildings. Hand washing and sanitizer locations, we've identified almost 600 locations throughout the district where we'll have hand sanitizer dispensing locations. Breakfast and lunch protocols, we're still working through how we're going to be doing feeding for students, particularly at lunch with the numbers that we anticipate. We will likely have to share and have some kind of student feeding in the cafeteria, but also some to maintain social distancing. We know we're not going to be able to serve all students there, and we'll likely have some students eating in classrooms. This, of course, means some supervision implications, and that we have to partner with our employee associations to discuss the impact of that. So those discussions are ongoing. And then lots of questions about heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. We currently have a MERV 8 standard, which is the particulate level that we have currently in the buildings. We are considering going to a higher standard of MERV 13, which allow for us to actually filter out a much higher standard in terms of the environmental protections that we provide. We're looking at this in detail with our environmental consultants, and on staff we actually have a licensed mechanical engineer who's helping to lead those conversations. So welcome anybody who has specific questions about that to contact me directly, and we'll try and answer your questions. As far as transportation, we've purchased some mister equipment to be able to help with disinfecting our buses overnight and to ensure adequate and appropriate cleaning and care of those buses. Working with our transportation department also to think carefully about routing and how that will work once we have a determination about the teaching and learning plan. Finally, we know to meet the Department of Health requirements, we are going to have to staff up in our custodial support areas. So we do have approximately $2.5 million in new CARES money that will be applied directly to increasing the custodial support, primarily at night, to ensure that all of our schools are wiped down, cleaned, and sanitized appropriately for school the next day.
Thank you, Dr. Miyako. Now we'll transition back to Dr. Harvey.
So we know that there are still quite a few questions in our Q&A portion of the webinar. We will continue to answer those as well as post a lot of the answers to them on our frequently asked questions part of our website. Some questions that we heard before the virtual town hall we're going to now address. So one question is, how will we enforce students wearing masks? So we know that this is going to need to be a partnership between students, families, and our staff. So we'll work with our students and families to educate them about the requirement and importance of face coverings. With the new governor's orders about requiring face coverings in public, we have a jump start on that. So I know that many families and students are already having an opportunity to wear face masks, but there are some things that families can do prior to the first day. Letting your child choose a mask that fits them, that feels comfortable, that they may be excited about, teaching them to wear it properly, and then starting by having them practicing it, wearing it for short periods of time while doing some fun activities. It could even be in your home. For our younger kids, making play masks for stuffed animals and dolls, and really talking to students about the importance of wearing their face masks. So how will we ensure 6-foot distancing? So the Department of Health guidelines, per their guidelines, students will be spaced 6 feet apart. And so we will start by putting desks into classrooms spaced out 6 feet apart, and interactions closer than 6 feet will be limited. Department of Health guidelines also state that passing briefly in a hallway or at a classroom, especially when everyone is wearing a mask, is low risk. But we are continuing to investigate strategies to minimize risk outside of the So offering childcare, we will continue to offer before and after school childcare through Right at School, who is an outside provider. Similar to what we've done previously, it will be a fee for service basis. Unfortunately, due to space, we will not be able to offer childcare for our 4th and 5th grade students on their in-home learning days. But we are working with Right at School to determine if there are other spaces outside of our schools that they may be able to use to provide childcare for 4th and 5th graders. Again, that would be on a fee basis. So questions have come up about changing models during the school year. If a family chooses K-3 in person or the 412 hybrid model, but then they change their mind and have an interest in moving to the Renton online school, they may do so. If a family chooses the Renton online school and then wishes to move to a hybrid or fully in-person model, we will allow that to happen at the beginning of a new trimester or at a natural breaking period, and if there is space available. On that question, another thing that had come up was about students in the Renton online school losing their space in their home or neighborhood school, specifically around Sartori. And if a family does choose Renton online school for the 2020-21 school year, they would keep their space for 2021-22 at Sartori or at any of our other schools. So what are the options for staff with underlying health conditions? Really, that is such an individual question, and how we answer it is very individual. So staff really should contact their general physician and then work with human resources to determine next steps and options. So as I mentioned earlier, we are continuing to work on our plan for Meadowcrest. Plans for our different preschool programs could be different. So plans for our inclusive preschool versus our Head Start and ECAP programs could be different because they are different programs with different numbers of kids. So our plan for specialty schools like Tally High School, Renton Academy, and our home program. The minimum time right now for Tally High School and Renton Academy will be aligned with in-person hybrid model, but we are really looking carefully at how we could add additional in-person time if possible. We're looking at space, we're looking at our ability to follow the Department of Health guidelines, and information will go out to those individual families who have kids in those programs. We'll be working with the home program to determine their in-person learning schedules and how they're accommodating families during this time. High school athletics is another question that we are asked very often. The registration for high school fall athletics is open. The fall sports have been delayed by WIAA, and they plan to have further announcements on fall sports made on July 22nd. But right now, they have said that football practices would be scheduled to start on September 5th, with all other fall sports starting on September 7th. That's the most recent information we have. We don't know if that will be updated on July 22nd with new information. So we're continuing to work on quite a few things. Some of it is because we're waiting for further guidance from Department of Health or OSPI. So we're working on things like breakfast and lunch service, our after school activities, and then classes like band, orchestra, choir, and physical education.
Just going to look to the cabinet really quick in terms of any questions that have come up that need to be addressed right now. So just in terms of some next steps, obviously we will continue to partner with the Department of Health and Public Health Seattle and King County. And as part of that process, as Dr. Harvey mentioned, is that there's a lot of the last week or so, a lot of conversations and shifting focuses at the state level, and not just in our state, but throughout the nation. And so as we continue to monitor the data, and every day I'm on the Department of Health website looking at those metrics, as needed, we will make adjustments to our preliminary plan. We also will continue to work with our labor partners as we impact bargain whatever model we may be in come the start of the new school year. And we will continue to update our community. Now, just for clarification, one of the questions I was asked today by a teacher was, when does the district kind of have to make its final decision around a plan? And what OSPI and the State Board of Education have said is that there has to be a resolution and a reopening plan submitted to OSPI and the State Board of Education no later than 2 weeks prior to September 2nd. And so we have a board meeting on August 12th, I believe, but 2 weeks before, the last day would be August 19th, I think the day would be the 19th. So we have to get that plan in by that time, and the board has to approve that resolution, and those are submitted to both of those organizations in Olympia. Obviously, I just happened to see it scroll down for a second. It's hard for me to see everything because I have the PowerPoint up, but there were 443 odd questions that have been asked thus far. As was mentioned, we have an FAQ, frequently asked questions page that we're going to be updating and putting information on there. You see the link below, the general website, as well as the specific page that talks about the 2020-2021 school year. Additionally, there's an email address to community relations. Typically it is that office that is handling the communications, both with families and the broader community when there are people have wonderings about, well, what exactly is going on. And if community relations can't answer it, they will ensure that it gets to an individual who can answer the question or be able to follow up once we can answer that question. And so as we kind of close tonight, I know, as I said earlier, that the uncertainty, the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, that all of the stress and questions and concerns that come up at this time is definitely understandable. And it also points out the need, I believe, for our community, not just our school district, but our entire community, to remain united as we continue to respond during this pandemic. And I know that emotions are running high and people have disagreements, but we cannot let those tear us apart. And as was pointed out during a press conference today by the Department of Health, there are clear actions that each of us can take starting today and over the subsequent weeks to create the conditions that will ultimately allow our students and staff to potentially return to school. And I think it's incumbent on each of us, again, not just our school district, not just the Renton community, but our broader state and nation, to take those steps that will allow our kids and our communities to kind of get a handle on this pandemic and be able to move forward as safely as possible. I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Moving forward, we will continue to share the status of our plan. We will also continue to respond to those questions as we will save the Q&A tonight. I hope all of you stay healthy and safe, and I wish you a very good night. Thank you again for joining us.